Hi everyone, welcome to the One Code Camp channel. So in this video, we're diving into a topic that's the backbone of dynamic user interfaces in React, which is mapping data to components. But what exactly does that mean? So it's all about taking your data, whether it's an array of objects or any other format, and then dynamically generating React components to display that certain data. So don't worry, because we'll walk you through the process step by step, from setting up your data to mapping it to components. You'll gain a solid understanding of this fundamental concept in React development. So whether you're building a simple to-do list or a complex e-commerce platform, mastering mapping data to components will take your React game or your React skills to the next level. If you're ready to level up your React game, let's get started. So for today, our focus will be on a fundamental concept in ReactJS, which is the mapping data to components. But before we delve into the details, let's take a step back and understand the big picture. So let's take a moment to understand why this is an essential skill in React development. So we all know that ReactJS is a JavaScript library for building user interfaces, and it shines when it comes to creating dynamic and interactive web applications. The key idea here is to break down our user interface into smaller, reusable pieces called components. And these components are like building blocks that we can use to construct our entire application. And now, when we talk about mapping data to components, we essentially are looking at how we can take information or data and display it within these React components. So think of data as the content you want to showcase on your web page. It could be a list of items, user information, or any other type of dynamic content. Just imagine you have, for example, an array of names, and you want to display each name as a separate component on your web page. So instead of manually creating component for each name, we can use a powerful concept called mapping. And mapping, in this context, is like a magic wand that allows us to efficiently create components based on our data. So it saves us from repetitive coding and makes our application more scalable. Okay, so mapping data to components is essentially the process of transforming your data into React components. This allows us to create a dynamic and reusable structure that can adapt to different sets of data. So in simpler terms, it's like having a blueprint for displaying information, and React helps us bring that blueprint to life. Okay? Boom. So going back to our example, in React, we often deal with arrays of data, and in this case, the array of names. Now, we want to display each name in the array as a separate component. We turn to the map function. Okay, so this is the time we turn to the map function. So the map function is a JavaScript method that allows us to iterate through each name in an array, perform some operation, and return a new array with the results. Okay, so we can use the map function to create a new array of React components, each representing a name. And this enables us to dynamically render these components based on the data provided. So for example, here inside our components folder, let's create a new file and name this mapping.js. Okay, and here inside our mapping.js file, the first thing that we need to import again here is the React library. So import React from React. And the next, we will create our functional component named mapping. So const, say mapping. Okay, so here, we are defining a component called mapping using the arrow function syntax. So in React, components are the building blocks of user interfaces. They are usable pieces of code that can be composed together to create complex user interface. So this specific component will render a list of names. Okay, and then to create our list of names, here above our const mapping or our functional component, let's create a variable named names, and then let's assign it an array. Let's have John, Jane, and Joseph. Okay, so in here, we just created a variable named names and assigned it an array containing 3 strings, the John, Jane, and Joseph. So this array will be used to generate a list of names later on in our code. Okay, and then let's have our return statement right here. Oops. And then let's declare here a div. And then inside this div, let's create an unordered list where we will render the list of names that we declared here above. Okay, so here the return statement marks the beginning of what the mapping component will render. So here, we're returning a JSX element which looks similar to HTML, and in this case, it's an unordered list. And then inside this unordered list element or the UL element, we will use the JavaScript's map function to iterate over each element in the names array. So let's do that. Use the JavaScript map function to iterate over each element in the names array. So to do that, let's call in names.map. So this is the map function, okay? So here, inside our UL element or unordered list element, we're using JavaScript's map function to iterate over each element in the names array. So to do that, let's type here names.map. So this is the map function that we will be using to access this array of names and then render them here in our website. Okay. Okay, so here, for each name in the array, we're creating a list item, which is the li element. And the key attribute is used to uniquely identify each list item, and we're using the index of each element as the key. While using the index as a key is acceptable in the simple scenario, it's generally recommended to use a unique identifier whenever possible. Okay? And finally, we're displaying the name inside the list item right here. Okay, so in summary, this code defines a React component called mapping that renders an unordered list containing the list items for each name in the names array, and each list item displays one of the names from the array. So this component can be used elsewhere in a React application to display a list of items dynamically. Okay, and again here we're using the map function to iterate over the names array, creating a new list element for each name, and the key attribute is essential for React to efficiently update the user interface when the data changes. Okay, and lastly, don't forget to export your component. Click Save. Okay, and then let's call this to our, or let's call this here in our app.js. First things first, import mapping from components folder and look for the mapping.js. Okay. And then let's call the mapping here after our my component. And there you go. Okay, so as you can see, we have here the John, Jane, and Joseph, similar to what we declared here inside our names variable, which is an array of names that has 3 strings, namely John, Jane, and Joseph. Okay, so again, we just use the map function to iterate over the names array. Okay, and then we can create another simple example. So just imagine you have a list of students, so each with a name and age. So we can also use the mapping to create a list of cards showing each student's information. Okay, so let's try doing that. If you're wondering why there is so much space right here, it's because of the styling that was applied here in app.css. So we can comment this one out. Oops, let's just erase that. So if you're wondering what that one is, that is the text align center. Okay, so that is why everything is aligned center right here. There you go. Our content is not anymore aligned in the center, except for this hello ReactJS, because we applied a style in here because we specifically set it to be text align is equal to center here in our heading style right here. Okay, so let's create another example in our mapping data to components. So again, here inside your components folder, create a new file, and let's name this time studentcard.js. Okay, so we will use the mapping to create a list of cards showing each student's name and, let's say, age. Okay, so import React from React. And then here in our student card file, this is where we will again use the mapping to create a list of cards showing each student's, let's say, name and age. Okay, so let's create first the data. So const students. Let's have an array, and then inside this array, let's create an object. Say the name. Then let's have here our student card function or functional component, student card. And then let's have here our return statement. And then inside our return statement, let's have a div. And then inside this div, let's have, say, h2. h3 is the age. Okay, let's make this big. And then let's call our name. And then here in the age, let's call the age. Okay. And then let's have here another function. Say student list. So this is where we will render the list of students from our students array. So the return statement. And then let's have here the export, so we don't forget to export this later on. Since we have 2 functions, we will use the square bracket first, and then the student card, which is the first function, followed by a comma, and then the second function, which is the student list. Okay, so here inside our student list, let's have a div. Then inside this div, let's again have an ordered list. So this is where we will now use our map function to create a list of cards or student cards showing each student's name and age. Okay, so let's have here the
have close.
Okay, so let's explain what we did right here. So first things first, we set up the data. So here we have an array called the students, and each element in the array is an object representing a student. And each student has properties, name, and age. Okay? And then after that, we have our component definition. So here, the student card function is a React component that takes the name and age as props and renders them inside a div element. So let's have this here, our name and age. Okay, and then this will represent the visual structure of a student card with the student's name and age. So we just created a special function called student card that takes two pieces of information, which is the name and the age, and we built a card with those details. So the card has two parts, a heading, heading 2. So this heading 2 will show the student's name, and heading 3 will just simply show the student's age. Okay, and then after that, this is where we map data to components. So the student list component uses the map function to iterate over the student's array. So for each student in the array, it dynamically generates a student card component, passing in the name and age properties as props. So the key attribute is crucial for React to efficiently update the user in interface when the data changes again. Okay, so always remember that one. And in here, we again use the map to loop through each students in the students list. So just imagine it as a machine that goes through each box in the treasure chest one by one. So for every student, the map function does two things. It takes the student's information, like the name and then the age, and it uses that information to build a new student card, like the one that we just defined earlier. So the student list function is like a big board where we display all the student cards. So it uses an ordered list or the UL element to organize the cards one below the other. So remember the machine going through the treasure chest, just imagine it as placing each student card on the board. Okay? And finally, here in our app.js, this is where we will again render the student list component. Okay, so this in turn will render an unordered list containing dynamically generated student card components for each student in the students array. Okay, so first, again, let's import the student card from the components, and then student card.js. And then let's call here, click here, click save, and there you go. It rendered an unordered list of the list of names or the student card that we defined here in our student card.js. So in summary, this code just showcases the concept of mapping data to components in React. It's flexible and an efficient way to render a list of items, for example, allowing you to create reusable components and maintain a clear separation of concerns in your React application. So we define an array of students with objects containing a name and age. We created a student card component that takes name and age as props and displays them. And then we have the student list component that uses the map function to loop through the students array. So for each student, it creates a student card component, which is this one, and passes the student's name and age as props. Okay, so the key prop is important for React, again, to efficiently update the list when the data changes. Okay, so that is it for our mapping data to components. So the beauty of mapping data to components is that it makes our code more modular and reusable. So whether you have 10 names or 100, the same blueprint can be applied, making your code scalable and efficient. So in conclusion, the mapping data to components is a fundamental skill in React development. It will enable us to dynamically render content and create scalable and modular applications. And it offers several benefits. It allows for dynamic rendering of components, it reduces code redundancy, and makes our code more scalable and maintainable. Plus, it's a fundamental concept that you'll encounter frequently when working with ReactJS applications.